Hello and welcome to the So Bet Punks podcast. This is the podcast in which every 2 weeks we speak about meaning, transcendence, awe and spirituality with a small s.
A very small s.
I'm Dave.
I'm Siobhan and welcome to episode 80 of our podcast.
Indeed, which I suppose we should... Do we celebrate 80?
I don't know. How many people have gotten to 80? Oh, that's a horrible way to go.
How many people have gotten to 80? Fuck me.
What is it? I can't look it up, and we should have looked it up earlier. I wonder what 80 is. By the time you get to 80, paper and wood and steel and diamond and all
are you talking about... This is, by the way, this is
Anniversaries.
the love episode.
Love.
It's going to be a bit like Alan's deep bath. But, so is that what you're talking about? Is that what the wood and the...
Yeah. Anniversaries, isn't it?
Anniversaries. So we've managed to get to paper so far.
That's not very.
Do you think we're gonna make it to? Is wood the next one?
I think it might be. I'm not really sure. I think it starts pretty small. I think wood actually might be a bit later on.
I think wood's later on as well.
No idea, really. No idea. But 80, by the time you get to 80, you must be running out of things. They must be like, I don't know, pencil sharpness.
Sick of each other. I don't think people... I don't know. You'd have to get to... What would you... Not many people have got to their 80th wedding anniversary.
No.
You'd have to be about 100. Unless you're ish.
Ish.
So,
I wonder... Yeah, you must be running out of items by then.
Well, this love episode has started off happily.
Full of love.
It is 5 days after Valentine's Day.
Yeah, so...
And you'll be hearing this at least 6 days after Valentine's Day. So we thought appropriate to do a love episode.
Yeah, why not? It makes just as much sense as what our podcast normally makes sense about.
That didn't make sense.
No, I know. Just in keeping with our brand, in fairness.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Our brand.
That felt a bit Kafka-esque then, the sentence that you just made. We went to a bookshop yesterday in London, and it was a lovely bookshop, and it had every now and again in its fiction section, it would have a sort of somebody's name, like a big author's name.
Yeah,
and
indicating there would be books of their... authorage.
Oh my God.
I'm so awake.
This is fantastic. We're doing this in the morning as well. We've had the conversation about this, so we're different people now, so it might be different to what you used to.
Yeah.
That probably wouldn't have made sense either.
No, I haven't put my glasses on either, so I'm definitely not intelligent. I've got prescription sunglasses. I'll bung them on.
Okay.
Just in case.
But the Kafka section had Kafka's name in big print, and it didn't have a single Kafka book on the shelf, which I thought was rather Kafkaesque.
I like that.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff.
Okay, well, this isn't going very well, so let's bang straight into the first little section that we like to do on this podcast, which is when we explain to you what we have done in the last couple of weeks, which has created a sense of meaning, transcendence, awe, or spirituality with a small s. Siobhan, as is always the case, you will go first.
Well, it's been a busy couple of weeks, so I must say nothing stood out when I tried to think why. I don't think I've done anything deliberately, put it that way. But I've done a couple of things that brought me unexpected meaning, I guess. Nothing transcendent, nothing really awe. One was I had a really good open conversation with someone at work who I would consider a friend, and it made me realise how few of these conversations I get to have with people who I would consider like close, true friends. I think I've mentioned this before as my thing. So this is how few and far between my conversations are. But it was really helpful to me. It was really personal, and it was really just the kind of conversations that I probably would have far more regularly with some of my closer friends where they physically closer, if that makes sense. I have old school friends called Mel and Tanya, who I think are probably the only kind of people that I would have these sort of conversations with in a kind of deep, meaningful friendship way. I don't really know why that is. Maybe it's, I don't know. But anyway, it was really good to have, some kind of a conversation where I got a lot from it. I got a lot of, it was supportive. It was really fun. I'm not really talking about what it was about, so this is just complete vagaries. But the idea of having someone who you could have a deep, meaningful conversation with, who isn't just you, David.
That's an example of love.
Love. Yeah, friendship love.
I meant with me.
Oh. Well. So yeah, that was one thing. The other thing, which is only, it wasn't very planned. We've been to London a couple of times in the last week. I went up on the first time on my own to meet Mel, who I just mentioned, for a gig, and I stayed alone, and I did a lot of walking on my own, to be honest, and it was all not planned. It was merely I just couldn't be bothered to get on the tube, so I thought, oh, screw it, I'm just going to walk across the bulk of central London to get to where I was staying. But in doing so, I found loads of different little bits that I'd never been to before, which I guess, given that I'd lived in London for like 10 years, was just really interesting and really fun. And it just, this little sense of like exploration and adventure that was just really fun. Finding things that I wanted to show you later, so like keeping you in mind.
Oh,
and
that
thinking,
bookshop with the Kafkaesque Kafka shelf.
Exactly, with the Kafka shelf. But just little teeny little things that just felt like what the modern world would call self-care. Going for a nice breakfast and getting fresh air and like treating oneself kindly. But I don't really want to call it self-care. I just call it looking after yourself in a very basic way. Loving oneself. But yeah, nothing too wild or exciting, nothing planned. So I did feel like I haven't done I think there's something about having the intention to do things that bring you meaning, transcendence, awe and spirituality that is important. And I must say the last couple of weeks I haven't done a lot of intentional things. But through just flinging myself into a few little situations, I found it anyway. So that was nice. But yeah, that's me really. Nothing much this week. But David, what about you? Spirituality, meaning, transcendence, or any of those in your lovely 2 weeks?
Mine is going to be about music.
Oh.
We should talk about music every now and again.
Yeah.
Really. And possibly, I was going to say sort of up-to-date music, but it's very much not up-to-date music, but it might be up-to-date for anybody who's going to Manchester Punk Festival in a few months, because I came up to meet you in London, went up to a gig and we met in London at some point, and I drove for the first time in quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got into the car, you had put on Dillinger 4's first album in the car, which I didn't necessarily know, and so as I turned the car on, it just started. And it's not an album that I listen to a lot anymore. It's an album that when I was probably 17-ish, was one of my favourite albums and one of my favourite bands, and maintained that status for quite a long time. But they haven't made any new music for a long time. I wouldn't say I've forgotten about them. That would be completely incorrect. But definitely not a band that I just think to put on very regularly anymore. And in honesty, probably, I was going to call it pop punk, but that probably undermines it a little bit. But I will call it that. Pop punk isn't really a type of music that I put on very often anymore. Full stop. So it's just, yeah. And I'd never really think to, and so by default it was just on, and it just gave me an immediate feeling of sort of being young, I suppose, to some extent, but also just that kind of there's certain albums, and I think with Dillinger 4 normally it's the first song on certain albums that I listened to when I was a kid, that as soon as they start to just give you an immediate feeling of sort of excitement and I don't know what, just something. There's some sort of special feeling, I think, that you get. The one that I always think of the most is Incomplete, which is the first song on Bad Religion Stranger Than Fiction album, because it's probably one of the first kind of like modern punk albums that I got. And I didn't really understand that punk could be like that, I suppose. Before that, I'd heard Green Day and I'd heard basically The Damned and The Exploited, I think, and so which are all great, and I'm not undermining any of those things. But when you hear I don't know, Incomplete by Bad Religion, it's a fucking great song as well. But anyway, and there's a few albums like that and it tends to be the first song because it's just like immediately takes you back to a time and place of being young or whatever. But with Dillinger 4, I think it's probably because that album sounds so different to anything else. It's quite scratchy, the production, in a really nice way. It doesn't really matter where you start. It just immediately, it just pulls me back immediately anyway. And so, yeah, that was a glorious experience and a lovely drive. apart from the fact that for the third episode running, I'm going to talk about my trapped nerve in my shoulder, which is still causing me massive amounts of pain, and driving in a car does make that worse because it wobbles it, which is the worst thing that you can do to a nerve when it's banging into bone. But it just certainly made it a bit nicer. We then went to a gig. I will say one thing. I don't know how to describe this without. I hope none of this sounds too mean. But we've talked about a similar gig to this, and I think I probably came across as quite mean then. But I don't mean it with any sort of. I just don't know how to describe the situation. But it did fill me with a genuine joy, and that is that we went to another one of these pappy metal gigs, which is where we were going when I was into Dillinger 4. I mean, that's the sort of life that we lead, It was a band called Unleash the Archers. They're Canadian. I would very much recommend them as a listening experience. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going and seeing them live or any other band like them live, to be honest, because I'm not even sure why. I think it's probably because the live experience of going to see extraordinarily capable musicians play their songs exactly as they've recorded them on record, and normally with a considerable amount of backing track going on at the same time, is not exactly to me anyway, what live music is about. Yeah. And maybe this says so, and then now I need to get into something where I am going to probably sound a little bit mean, but the audience that goes to see that sort of gig, and certainly had gone to see this gig, very similar to the discussion we had a few episodes ago about Battle Beast, like I say. I mean, I think to describe it as a probably very neurodivergent crowd would be fair.
You are picking your words.
I am trying,
carefully.
Well, no, I am picking my words carefully because I genuinely don't mean it. Yeah. With any sort of unpleasantness, but the only way, I don't know. I suppose it was a bunch of people that. It was not an artistic crowd. It's not a crowd looking for any sort of artistry. No. It's a crowd probably looking for a band to be able to play their songs exactly as they know them. And in some respects, and I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to make sense to anybody else, but in some respects, for what I consider the important, so the reaction that I had to hearing a Dillinger 4 song, it has nothing to do with how good the song is. That isn't to say that the songs aren't brilliant, but it has everything to do with kind of just a pure emotional response to something.
And a memory of time and place.
A memory of time, completely. It's all emotion. Yeah. I don't know which bit of the brain that is. I'm not clever enough, but it's the same
bit that has trauma. The trauma response comes from the same place.
But of course, but ironically, of course, makes trauma go away, right? Yeah. Fills that bit of the brain with something positive, and so therefore you feel really good. Yeah. I didn't get, and I'm making huge, vast sort of assumptions. But I didn't get the impression that, and to some extent the experience of going to see a band like Unleash the Archers, you're not getting that. That's just not why people go. Yeah. Because you can't get that, because it's listening to someone play something perfectly. It's all about sort of the singer being able to sing really well. It's all about the guitarist being able to do their guitar solos really well.
I think that kind of level of pappy metal has into its fabric of its being, the whole reason it goes and that it exists is this kind of really dramatic chord progressions. It's very anthemic. It's very to hear it's over the top emotional, which is interesting because it's performed in a soulless way. But because it's, if you approach it from a different perspective, it's really anthemic music performed exactly correctly, as it were. So whilst you and I probably don't get anything from that there's no actual soul there, the music by default is probably invoking some sort of emotional response in people that could be confused with or in place of an actual soulful performance, because it's just that feeling is happening in people. Watching everyone in that room.
But we had this discussion afterwards. You're being very careful, and I don't mind not being quite as careful as that, because again, I don't say this in a derogatory way. I mean, this is a brilliant thing, I think.
Yeah.
This is why I bring up the fact that I think it was a very neurodivergent crowd, because actually that sort of sorry, I am going to use ugly words to some extent, but I just don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah.
That sort of quite simplistic form of emotion,
Yeah.
i.e., here we go, I'm going to sing a really high note, and
Yeah.
and there's going to be a huge crescendo that is almost sort of like, I don't know, maybe not classical music, but just basically like Eurovision music.
Well, this is also
It's
how
like,
pop music works.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the charts that are big ballads work because of this.
But I think to those people with a relatively, and again, I just don't know what words to use for this, so I do apologise if these are clumsy. But like with those people that maybe emotion isn't the first thing that they experience, or even that they would consider important, or even something that they necessarily consider very much. Mm-hmm. It's amazing for those people because it's kind of.
It's a very literal thing, and one that, this is the beauty of music generally, whether you agree with how it's being performed or not. Like, there are some chord progressions that give me a flutter inside, and I can't explain that. So I think it's that on the grandest scale without actual emotional performance. Yeah. But it's still doing the thing. Like, those sorts of big anthemic culminations of music are creating those flutters inside people that maybe they don't understand why it's happening.
Well, they seemed overawed by it. So many people around us, and we moved around quite a bit in the room. Not for this reason, I wasn't being nosy, but I am getting to something with this as well. An actual experience, which was just wonderful. But it was like there was people just having the sort of reaction to this music that was. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it before. I think I described once on this podcast. I'm sure I've said this about one in 1996. I went and saw Tool, and there was at the Astoria, and there was somebody sobbing in the audience, and it felt like, and there was just this thing where it's like the music had just overwhelmed them completely. Yeah. And this felt like a room full of people where the music was overwhelming them, and which was lovely, brilliant. But again, and maybe I'm obviously making a lot of presumptions about their sort of emotional worlds by saying that. Yeah. But I will say this, unquestionably, it was, and this was constant everywhere we moved around the room. These people didn't have rhythm. I'm sorry, but it's important for me to point this out in order for me to describe my moment of joy. So again, I do apologise for the clumsiness of this, but. But no one was in time. There was points where they were getting people to clap along, and you could watch the hands, and they weren't clapping at the same time. And they were doing that thing where you put your arms in the air, and it was a bit like the hokey cokey at points. But then this sort of music is. That's how they do. They have that stage show, that kind of classic rock stage show where one of the bands, I will say, this was not a moment of awe. The first band that came on said, "Let me see your phone cameras." No, sorry, let me see your phone torches. When they played a ballad, that I almost left at that point. But anyhow, the reason I bring all of this up is I am getting to something. Is that where we ended up was sort of towards the back of the room by the bar, and there was a girl in front of us, and she was having. I don't think I've ever seen anyone have a better time in my life, and she was just dancing her face off to this band. She was. I've never known anyone to be more out of time in every single movement that she made. Like it was just nothing made sense. The dance was complete madness. It was. There was no point where any bit of her body hit the beat. There was no point. No, let me say. I know this sounds mean, but she was clapping out of time. Everything was just. There was points where the music would stop. She was still dancing. There was a guy next to us doing the same. He was headbanging, and they would stop, and the singer would be talking. He was still headbanging. Oh. Not in time with the previous song or the next one. Just headbanging. Just
having a go.
But. So I really enjoyed the band. The band was great, don't get me wrong. But after about half an hour of the band, because these bands play for a long time as well because they're metal bands. To be honest, from about half an hour in, I was just watching this girl. We were right. Just her back. I don't mean just watching her go, and it was fucking glorious. Like I say, she was having the time of her life. It was like this was the absolute height. And of course, I ended up reading a lot into that. I think she was on her own, so that sort of made it even more special to me.
Yeah.
I just sort of assumed this was her favourite band, but maybe she just dances like this to any music that she's ever heard. Who knows? I know nothing about her, never will know anything about her, but the story that I told myself was basically that. And she just seemed to be having the greatest fucking time in the world.
And I think...
completely out of time.
Oh, yeah, and probably, like, in the nicest way, unaware of the people around her.
Did not give a
like,
fuck. And that was beautiful.
Just having, like, the nicest time. It was a bit like, I mean, it's cliche to say that, like, dance like no one's watching thing, but she was literally like, it was like her, the band, going fucking mental.
And my impression was that she didn't even, the idea of anyone watching had not even crossed her mind.
No.
It wasn't like she was doing it deliberately. There was no pomp or so, there was nothing. It wasn't in any way contrived. It was utterly genuine.
It's pure joy.
And again, I've probably read a bit into that, but I suppose in comparison to that, I compare that to a lot of the shit that you see. You go and see what I would describe as real music. Music that isn't pappy and doesn't have a big backing track and isn't sort of a bit empty of emotion, and the cool kids will go and see, and so much of that dancing is so incredibly contrived. It is, everyone is so aware of the fact that at any point they might get papped by someone's selfie and it might end up on social media. Everyone is so aware of how cool they look or whatever.
That is one thing to be said for at least the gig we went to, or I would probably say the last few that have been that sort of style music. There is a lack of phones. It's refreshing that there's not a lot of phones around. People
apart from when some prick on stage says, "Get out your phone."
But people do seem to be like in the moment, actually enjoying it for the sake of being there and enjoying it. Same cannot be said. I went to saw Justice again last week, and it was disappointing just how many phones.
Justice
were coming out.
Being the French
electro duo. Yeah, they were amazing, but just the amount of phones coming out. And it is like they do have an incredible light show, but like just watch it.
Is that an excuse?
Well, no,
they do have an incredible light show.
Well, just watch it. Like people are watching it via their phones. It's like just be there. But yeah, these pappy metal bands, people are very much in the room.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, so it should be.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry if any of that sounded mean, because I really didn't mean it to be mean-spirited, but I don't really know how to describe what I'm trying to describe. I suppose is a person, and I'm assuming so much of this, but a person. Yeah, I don't know. All right, I won't do it again because I can't think of any words to use that aren't just going to... Siobhan's giving me a look like I've said something outrageous.
No, you haven't said anything outrageous. I'm just aware that we sound like absolute voyeuristic knobheads.
Well, maybe, but then I suppose
which
there
I
is
think we were,
well, maybe, but then don't get me wrong, I was well into it. I mean, I went to the gig because I wanted to have that experience. But it's just that when they came on and the first band who played, I'm not having a kick. I liked all the bands that played, by the way, but you weren't there for this.
No.
But when they came out, the song started and none of them were playing. And they didn't have a bass player, but there was bass. And they didn't have a keyboard player, but there was keyboard. And after a little while, I realised that basically the only things that were live was the drums and the singing. Yeah. And then whenever a guitarist did a guitar solo. And everything else was on the backing track. And it sounded so produced. Yeah. And I'd never heard the band before. So, I mean, I assume it sounded exactly like the record, but I obviously haven't heard the record. And they were good, and it was fine, and it was... There was nothing wrong with it.
But there's something about it not being as real as...
Well, it's not live music, is it? It's like going to Eurovision Song Contest.
But there's also something about it being real and I don't know, there's something psychological there, isn't there? But something about being real and in the moment and actually in front of you rather than just playing a song. That being said, I saw Justice and I'm pretty sure they just press buttons, but it's still very good.
Yeah, would have just pressed play. Yeah, you said they did 2 encores, and I thought that just means they pressed play 3 times.
They literally just walked off, came back on, and just carried on. I was like, yeah, but you don't need the rest. What are you doing?
But yeah, I mean, it couldn't be differently. We talked a few episodes ago about like Jesus Lizard, and I mean, Jesus Lizard are incredible musicians. Don't get me wrong; they played incredibly well, and no question they were very tight, and all those things, all the things that you would want from a really good band.
Yeah.
And, and don't get me wrong, we both play in bands. I would love, we aim to be as good as we can be, like it's not about like being scrappy and shit for the sake of it.
No.
But it's just, there's something about being that perfect that just almost it removes something. It doesn't
It
add
does.
something to me anyway. But again, not to the sold out audience in the Islington Assembly Hall.
Even the singer at one point, she was like, "Guys, I need a bit of help." And maybe it was just performative, but I kind of got the impression it wasn't, because when she was talking, she did sound a bit scratchy. But she was like, "Guys, I'm a bit sick at the minute, so gonna need your help." And then just continues singing like Mariah Carey level, like brilliant.
Well, there was a
this your version of shit? Isn't that shit at all?
Well, there was a brilliant bit where I think they cut the music out in order to get the audience to sing along, and she did a thing with her hand, which I'm not going to be able to fully, because you can't see me, but she did a thing with her hand where she sort of moved the hand up to the different notes that so it sort of went and she moved her hand up to try and tell the audience where they went, and as soon as the music stopped, all you heard was about 1,000 people going so it wasn't just the rhythm they didn't have.
I love that though.
God love them, but they didn't. That's the thing, they were having the time of their lives. It doesn't matter. I'm not critiquing their singing or their dancing. I'm saying it was fantastic.
I love it. Oh well.
Well, if that hasn't got you in the mood for love,
let's get you back in the mood for love.
Let's go to Beckenham. Beckenham
let's
and get some love.
For some love.
All right. Beckenham doesn't have much love.
I was about to say, I don't remember there being any love in Beckenham.
No.
To be honest.
No.
Well, many reasons
Yeah, I hope there
for
are more than two.
discussing love. We don't need a reason to discuss love. Love is everything. We should be discussing it more.
I mean, fundamentally, Siobhan, whenever we're talking to each other, we're always basically talking about love in some sort of metaphorical context, aren't we?
Well, but yeah.
You didn't get that from the neurodivergence discussion a minute ago, no?
Yeah, that was really loving and all compassionate.
That was a metaphor for my love for you.
Thanks, I think. Then obviously we've had Valentine's Day, which, is a card-giving day for love, apparently. But also, kind of randomly, I started reading a book about love, and it's called The Art of Loving. It's not
a sex book,
it's not
ladies and gentlemen.
Far from it. It's by a chap called Eric Fromm, who was, I'm assuming he's not alive now, was a I don't know if he was a psychoanalyst actually, but he was definitely a psychologist, definitely along that sort of lines. Post-Freud, he's not really into Freud's ideas actually, as it happens, but I think
Freud was a lot of things, but he wasn't really interested in love.
He was actively uninterested in love. His whole point was love is the outcome of your sexual desires. Sometimes it happens, but love is not the important thing. The only important thing is to be sexually gratified. But Eric Fromm is coming from the absolute other end, and he's saying, love, everything comes after love. He actually goes as far as to say love is the only answer to the human meaningless of existence. He's just like, there is no point in existing other than to love. And he talks about this in his book. But one of the main points of his book, and it's called The Art of Loving, because he's indicating that there's a practice that requires effort, concentration, and patience and skill, unlike the romantic idea of love that we in the modern culture sort of have. And we've touched on this before, and actually a lot of people who we like their books and thinkings, Alain de Botton for one, the whole point of School of Life is to teach us these things that we're brought up to believe we inherently have, but actually as human beings we don't.
Well, I think his argument is quite an interesting one, because it's that if you're going to try and do anything, if you're going to drive a car, for example, or and obviously there's much harder things than driving a car. If you're going to drive a car, you get weeks and weeks and weeks and hours of practice and teaching in order to show you how to do something as basic as turn a wheel and put a car in gear and use your feet a bit. But we don't get any training in how to have a successful relationship.
Yeah.
And what we're actually expected to do, and what society tells us that we should do, is just be able to immediately be experts at it.
Yeah.
And actually base the person, and this is specifically, I mean, love obviously can be between lots of different people and in lots of different ways, but this is, I suppose mostly, I think anyway, we're going to end up talking about kind of couples or whatever. And in the context of a couple, it's like you kind of get together not necessarily for reasons of love, particularly in the modern world. And then but when you decide, oh no, this is actually the person that I'm going to be with for any amount of time, whether that be forever or whether that just be for, however long, you're expected to then just be able to put on this different pair of shoes and just be an expert at doing that and have a really great relationship with them, and everything should just fall into place, because if it doesn't fall into place, then you can't possibly be in love with them. Yeah,
100%. I mean, that's going back to the Freud idea of love. That's why that one completely falls apart. And it was Fromm talks about the different times of society and the different expectations of love. Back in the day, back in Victorian times, arranged marriages were still a thing, and you would just kind of get put with someone and everything came later. And at the time, there's lots wrong with that, your freedom of choice or your, free will, or, I imagine that there was a lot of people that were stuck in places they didn't want to be. But then the next thing that comes, post First World War, is this kind of rebellion against that. And it's like, let's just be freedom, let's have lots of love. And actually, the notion, along with Freud appearing around that time, the notion of love then became, if you were sexually compatible with someone, then that was love. But that inevitably goes away. And then what's left at the end is nothing if you haven't worked it and you haven't had love. So this is what Erich Fromm was saying. He's like, actually, it's love and everything good comes after that sort of situation.
Well, yeah, and I think I'm right in saying this. I think this is via Alan de Botton that I'm talking about. I think this is fundamentally from him. Is about this idea that the ideal relationship as a couple is to kind of train each other in how to. Is to educate each other.
Yes.
Basically, educate each other in both in a personal way, so i.e. educate them in what the other respective person, or I'm sure people have all sorts of different relationships. I'm not being heteronormative here, or if you're in a relationship with two other people, then that's fine too. However, whatever your scenario is that within that couple or within that relationship, you can educate each other in what you each want, in a literal, like, individual way. Yeah. But also just in a sort of general way, like here is how to have a good relationship. Yeah. With each other. I
think one of Fromm's main thing, and it backs onto that, is his argument is you cannot only have love in a relationship with one other person. In order to love in any way, you have to be able to love in every way. And he said if there's ever a reason that you can't do a particular bit of love, then... So what he names there's like 5 different versions of love. He says there's like brotherly love, erotic love, motherly, fatherly love, love for God, and there'll be another one. Self-love. That's exactly it. And with that self-love comes knowledge. So he refers back to, right at the beginning of the book, he's just like, if you don't know yourself, it's the Socrates, like, know yourself thing. Can't remember how that goes.
Know thyself.
Know thyself.
You were almost there.
I nearly got there. But
you modernised it. You were like the street Bible.
Know yourself. Know yourself. And it was yourself, you know that.
Yeah.
Know yourself.
Yeah.
So it's the idea of you have to understand oneself in order to be able to understand other people. That self-understanding is where psychoanalysis kind of like takes off from, because it's also understanding your attachment styles to your mum and your dad, the love that you have there. Are you then seeking it in your relationships? Are you seeking it in other people? Brotherly love refers to the idea of, it's not just brother, it's the idea of kin and friendship and love for humankind. He also talks about love for God and the fact that we don't have that love for God anymore, or that it's now an idolatry one. So we've gone through loads of different scopes of how we love God, or culture did, from back in the time when it was mystical and just this idea of good. It's then progressed to an ideal one where it's like God is brilliant and we, as a being,
or terrible, I suppose. That's
terrible.
That's unequal
to be feared.
Because I suppose you also could love. It's like that humanism thing, isn't it? You if you don't love. Okay, we're going to talk about God-shaped holes again. If you don't have God in your life, so that's empty. So then you fill that with something. So whatever it is you fill it with, whether that be your partner, or whether that be a political party, or whether that be whatever,
an
idea, a philosophy. I suppose that's a type of love.
Yeah. It's a worship anyway. He then also talks about like when specifically the idea of God being the father, and how it's been historically different. We've had mother figures like in the past that have been very important, but the difference of having God as a father figure, the love for a father figure is always one of, it talks about motherly love being unconditional and fatherly love being very conditional. So all of a sudden we have this kind of, you have to do good in order to deserve your love sort of situation. So we see that in like religious love towards, society saw that as love in a godly way. He kind of talks about how that's not helpful, and this kind of like doing things to deserve love.
Is that not helpful? So I mean, what that immediately makes me think of is the fact that so there's obviously a lot of there's quite a lot of talk recently. The anxious generation, which I think we've talked about, is coming out like about parenting styles, of which very soft parenting is causing people to in simple terms, to come out not ready for the world, if you like. Yeah. So if you're parented in a way that you're not given, you're looked after almost, if you like, too much. You're not allowed to have too much independence because your parents are just loving you all the time. Yeah. Which I think is a modern-ish parenting style, although that's very arguable. Yeah. But when you describe that God-like love where you have to do something in order to get that love, and maybe you described it as well as a fatherly love, and I mean I'm certainly not a father, but I suppose maybe this is a difference between a male perspective of parenting and a female perspective of parenting, maybe. But surely there is something good, there is something that we've also lost, and I mean we talk a lot about how by losing religion, what we've lost there. One of those things is that aspect of like somebody bigger than us having expectations of us that we have to live up to, and how actually I think that's quite an important aspect to bring into going back to just a relationship with another person. Yeah, you need to have you obviously have to think about yourself, but you need to have an element of wanting to live up to that person's expectations in order for that relationship to work in any way. And that's not to say that they should expect that of you. It shouldn't be like a problem. That shouldn't be a problematic thing. I don't mean that in a context of like one person holds power and the other person has to live up to the power. I think both parties hold some degree of expectation, which you could describe as power, and an element of trying to live up to that is what makes a good relationship, because otherwise what do you have? You just have two people that are expecting a load of things of each other, because we all expect things of other people, and neither party is getting them.
Yeah, I agree. So there's two things. One of the things, just going back to the anxious generation idea of parents loving too much or being too not safe, but like in the middle, is brought up in this book that's written in I think the 50s. It's parts of it are so what we're going through now, and it is that kind of the parents that are hands-offish, that the child never knows if they've done good or bad, so they just live in this constant state of anxiety, as opposed to like feeling supported and free. Because they're not given guidance either way, they feel the opposite. Well,
surely either you grow up thinking everything you do is right, or you grow up thinking, I've no idea whether what I'm doing is good, bad, or indifferent.
And I guess the thing that we have there is, there's another book that we've both read recently, Anna de Botton wrote, The School of Life wrote about how to overcome your parents. Yeah. And basically every parenting style leads to neurosis, it turns out, of some kind.
Oh yeah, trauma is, we all have trauma.
Yeah. But I guess, so what Eric Fromm kind of comes at is, it's about self-awareness of that. It's about doing the work on ourselves. So we can't expect to love someone else and understand someone else and have knowledge and respect for someone else if we don't have it for ourselves. And this is where he talks about those 5 domains, about being able to love other people, about having, he's atheist, but he talks about, cultures of religion, being able to love our parents or understand the love that we had with them. But yeah, we can't love another person unless we have love for ourselves. And the only way to have love for ourselves is to understand ourselves.
Isn't that a very Buddhist idea?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but that thing where sometimes Buddhism appears to be quite a selfish art because you're working on yourself fundamentally. You're trying to make yourself better all the time, but you're trying to make yourself better in order to play a better role within society, community, whatever, and that would include surely in a relationship. Yeah,
100%. And I just think the other thing that Buddhism teaches very well is that it's hard. And that it's a practice.
It's not. I mean, it's impossible to ever. There is no end. There's not. You don't finish.
But
until you die.
And so that's like one culture in the world is like, here's a dedicated practice till you die that you never get good at, and you have to do that in order to even be capable of loving other people. But our Western society goes, love is easy. You fall in love. Yeah. It just happens to you. Eric Fromm talks about we should consider it standing in love. Like, it's not just falling. It just it's you're there. It's happening. You have made it happen. It's a conscious choice. He talks about it definitely being more choice and more that we have control over it than our lovely romantic films would allow us to believe.
Well, films, I think, are very damaging in this respect, or films or just stories, I suppose. Because, of course, in films, the only way... it's almost impossible to present... I mean, I'm sure some films have a go at presenting love in slightly different ways, but fundamentally the only way, because of limits on time and imagination, that you can explain this sort of thing is by... There's that moment in films where suddenly two people that up to that point have had either nothing to do with each other or have been maybe at each other's throats or something. Yeah. Suddenly their eyes meet and they kiss, and then we go on at the end of the film 10 years in the future and they've got kids running around or something. That's the thing that we're told. That's what a relationship is. It's that all of a sudden a spark of romanticism will take over the pair of you at exactly the same time, and you will have this very passionate kiss. Yeah. And then from that passionate kiss, you'll then be in bed. Yeah. That will be
having
perfect.
Amazing
sex. Perfect sex. Bodies. Perfect bodies. Yeah. I mean, you just look great. And then, and then you wake up the next morning and maybe you have a really deep conversation, or maybe you have an argument, but the argument brings you closer. It's like, I was going to say Hollywood, but it's not even Hollywood. I mean, it's literally just... It's just
how... For the entirety of modern culture. Like I say, I'm pretty sure that Eric Fromm talks about it being like a post-First World War thing that's just never let up. Throw into that capitalism, which is kind of weird, but capitalism...
Particularly as we're doing this about Valentine's Day, and that is literally...
Exactly.
Capitalistic love at its worst.
Throw into their capitalism, throw into the individualistic times that we're in now, where... we're thinking of ourselves, but not in a way where we're actually working on ourselves. We're thinking in a kind of consumerist way, like we're being told, you feel strange, you feel odd, but this will help you feel less odd, and you can
like these shoes.
Exactly. And you can feel less alienated by having things. And it's distancing you further from other people. It's not letting you work on, actually, why do I feel this way? And furthering your self-knowledge and therefore your ability to love. And so actually, not only have we got this, I mean, maybe this is like capitalism and the films have all worked out at the same time. It's just like, we just need to tell people the reason love is difficult is because it's this romantic love and you should just be falling in it, and if you're not falling in it, then that's why it hasn't happened.
Well, there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong with your partner, or probably both.
Exactly that. And at the same time, instead of working on yourself or working on your partner or working in your relationship, just buy this thing because this thing will help you.
Well, I mean,
and you'll feel less alienated by buying, as opposed to actually if you just turned off your telly, stopped buying things and spoke to your partner or worked on yourself. But that's not going to make money. So we live in a world where, not to become apologetic for it, but it's even harder to work on love right now. Well, I think you're swept up in the cycle of, well, I just need to buy something. I'm told that I don't feel this way because of I must be doing something wrong.
Well, marketers use this, and this is not just romantic love either. I mean, marketers use this continuously. Most adverts have an example of, like you say, buy this thing, and then it will show a happy couple. Yeah. It says go on this holiday, and what does it show? It shows a really happy family skipping through the sand. Yeah. Or it was
like alcohol adverts that show get bird and drink with your friends. It doesn't show you the person with 12 beers in their room alone, boshing them, feeling really fucking shit.
No, I mean, it literally shows the opposite. I mean, every alcohol advertisement is, if it's in a bar, it's a bunch of incredibly attractive people in a bar singing, not piss. No one's problematic in any way. Everyone's just happy. No one's having a fight. No one's getting annoyed with each other. No one's fallen out. Everyone's just happy, and and it's communal, and everyone knows everyone, and or you're at a party, or you're on the beach, or you're having a barbecue, or a picnic or something, and it's all you with other people, whether that be another person in a romantic context, or whether it be a group of friends, or whether it be a group of strangers, but a group of strangers who've come together and they're having this amazing moment.
Isn't that magic and romantic?
But like you say, I mean, I'm sure everybody listening to this, and certainly us, we've all drunk. I mean, it tends to be most examples of drinking. In fact, I've never had an example of drinking that ends like that.
No, but what we want,
and I've never looked like that whilst drinking. That's the other thing. No, you haven't.
But what we all want is the experience, and what the biggest problem that we have, especially in the capitalistic world that we're in and isn't going away, is we're not taught. You can get that by doing self-work on you. Like, it isn't followed. The advert isn't followed by, like, take this psychoanalysis course, or, speak to your partner. It's buy Bacardi. And so you're just like, I want the social life. I want the joy. I want that connection. So I better buy that booze, which is actually going to probably further distance yourself and alienate yourself from other people. But we're not living in a culture that can really, in the mainstream, celebrate self-knowledge and acceptance and love, because that isn't going to sell anything. Or if it is going to sell something, it's going to sell a course or a book, which may or may not, I don't know, I don't have a problem with that, but that's not what's mainstream. And it's definitely not what the culture is going to embrace. It's not what social media embraces. It's not what... Nothing is saying, switch all these things off and sit with yourself for a bit, because the world wouldn't work.
But of course, I know I always bring it back to this, but one thing that does do that, and one thing that has always done that, is religion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the thing, we talked about going to our Buddhist group not too long ago, and we said then, I remember, completely out of context of this, but, they've got no interest in taking our money. There's no, they need some money to run the thing and stuff, but it's not... and maybe you could argue that some churches, of course, are, they're obviously, it is a rich institution and what have you. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's not capitalistic in that way.
No.
I'm sure that, in fact, I know that a lot of modern churches do this sort of thing. I mean, there are adverts of, you go on a church website or something, which I've done through doing my course and stuff. Sometimes we have to go on these little things. And actually, I've gone through lots of different, so we've looked through different strands of Christianity, and we've looked through sort of even certain strands of Hinduism, like more populous Hinduism, and definitely Islam as well, although they're all in very different contexts. And it's really interesting, actually. It's really interesting to look at culturally what the equivalent of the people singing in the bar to sell you Bacardi Breezer is, as far as religion is concerned. But unquestionably, go on a church website or something, you'll see all the same thing. You'll see a bunch of people like extraordinarily happy, hugging each other, and I'm I bring that up more partly to say, of course, that's not going to be your experience if you just go to church on a Sunday, because you've got no context for it. But I would say, in fairness, that if there is an institution or something being sold to you that possibly would lead to you having those sorts of experiences, where loads of people and you've got a lovely community and all of those sorts of things, somewhere between religion and sort of that sort of self-help and is probably as close as it comes. You're still being sold it. It's still capitalistic. It's still not a good thing in a lot of ways. But the only other thing that comes close is punk.
True. Well,
but does it anymore? I don't know, but it could. It could, and it has. It did for me for a while, But then, and probably to those people in the Unleash the Archers audience, you could argue, And of course, they were sold things. T-shirts at that gig were £35, and there was a queue for the merch desk that went at the beginning because they all wanted first dibs on it. Again, going back to what I said earlier, but anyway, there was a long queue of people who wanted to get first dibs on the merch.
Yeah.
And it was very capitalistic, but more capitalistic than any gig I've probably ever been to, apart from Kiss.
Well, I mean, I was going to say Wacken. Twofold. Very capitalistic. Was printing T-shirts on the day to be up to date with. I think it was a washout, so on the week they were like, "Here's a new design. I was there the year it got flooded," but. Very community, very religious for all those people that were there.
Yeah, and also a place where genuinely strangers would just start chatting to each other.
Yeah, and it's really wonderful.
There was it did sort of feel like church in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of the punk scene. Again, maybe it's changeable and maybe that's not the case for everybody and things, but there are, I was going to say institutions, but that suggests something a bit more proper than probably what I'm describing. But there are societal or cultural movements, which I think you probably have that. I go to a protest, people will chat to you about how they're annoyed about whatever it is you're protesting about and things, I
think there is an element of how actually into it you are in that moment. And I mean... very practically, how much attention have you not assigned, but how into the moment are you? Because say, for example, at Wacken, when some of these happy metal were on, again, I maybe I'm misremembering it, maybe it's rose tinted, but I don't remember seeing a lot of phones. We were in the middle of a field where there was no signal anyway. When you get a phone out, there is something physically between you and the moment that is happening.
Yeah, the experience. Yeah.
So if there is tons of you doing that, filming the moment, and those who aren't filming it are just like listening to the moment, but also scrolling through their WhatsApp, you're not involved in that moment and you're not in the shared energy, if you want to go there, that's happening. Whereas the thing you're describing about punk, I think, is that actually... everyone, facing the same direction, hearing the same music, feeling it being played live.
But that is what you've just described as church.
Yeah, exactly.
That is religion.
And when you don't have the phones out, when you're actually in that moment, it's no different from singing at religion.
Well, yeah, you're singing along.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to read, it's kind of going back to a point, but I just noticed it in this book, and it made me... I don't know, just the fact that someone who wrote this book again, I'm guessing it's from the 50s, it might even be earlier, it would sound like it was from something nowadays. It's at the end and it's talking about the practice of love. So it's saying, love isn't something that we can just expect and fall into. You've got to work at it. And he divides it into lots of different factors. One being... patience, one being discipline, but one being concentration. And his description of the concentration problems that they were having whenever this was written is quite similar to ours. Our culture leads to an unconcentrated and diffused mode of life, hardly paralleled anywhere else. You do many things at once. You read, listen to the radio, talk, smoke, eat, drink. You are the consumer with open mouth, eager and ready to swallow everything. Pictures, liquor and knowledge. This lack of concentration is clearly shown in our difficulty in being alone with ourselves. To sit still without talking, smoking, reading, drinking is impossible for most people. We become nervous and fidgety and must do something with our mouth or hands. And he's saying all of that, massive barrier to love.
Yeah.
And so
but
that just sounds like modern day world. To throw into that a phone, throw into that absolute need to spend all your money on absolute crap and not have a real experience with someone.
Well, also, but so that's very similar. So there's a book from the 80s, I can't remember the guy who wrote its name, called Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is basically that, but in a book. But it's fundamentally about TV. It's about the television, and that, by the sounds of it, I think you're right. I think it is 50s, so there probably was TV, but it would have been slightly different. And it sounds like he's more talking about other things.
Yeah.
But with every progression that we've made, and I think this is fair to say, every progression that we've made, and not just in the context of technology, but also in the way that we work, how important our jobs are, the amount of sort of fun that we try and have, like the amount of hobbies that we have, this idea of leading a full life involves continuously doing things all the time, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but
no, No, but he mentions it in there where it's the idea of a working week, and he describes the 8-hour day, and he's like, people rebel. They do their 8-hour day. They're told what to do at work. So when they come out of work, the discipline's gone. They're just like, no, fuck it. I want to do absolutely nothing. And he calls it laziness, and he goes, but we now call it relaxing.
Well, yeah, but then, and so if you think about it, and this is a very simplistic way of looking at relationships, but so yeah, you come home from work. I think this is so true of almost everything. Anything to do with meaning.
Yeah.
Within our lives. So this isn't only about relationships, but it's also just about doing anything of any worth. It could be doing exercise or something.
Yeah.
It could be cooking a nutritious meal, or it could be having a discussion with your partner. But yeah, you put all of your effort into work. Like you say, you get home, you just want to slub.
Yeah.
And that's totally understandable, and we've all been there, and I'm not having a pop at anybody for doing that. But that's the exact time when really you need to be at your best, ready to do the work, ready to make your relationship better, ready to have a conversation with somebody, maybe go out and socialise with people, maybe go and organise something that's going to be of great use to you in the future, whether that be a gig or whether it be a holiday or whatever. It's when you need to read a book that's going to open your mind and give you new ideas. But what do? We sit down and we put Netflix on and we've talked about this many times.
And our whole culture is geared to that.
It's geared towards watching the thing that's going to send you off to sleep, or sitting with something on Netflix whilst you flick through your phone. Yeah,
not talking to your partner.
Yeah, or talking to them, but maybe talking to them about whatever you're looking at the phone, which again means that you're actually having a conversation with the phone. Yeah. You're not having a conversation with each other.
And you're not finding out anything about that person. So having similar interests does not a relationship make. And also some people say, oh well, I'm this and they're that, so together we make a team. But that's still but that's still not a working relationship. That's we unite to be one in the face of everything that's alienating, but it's still not love.
Well, you could almost argue that it's I use this person.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
You could say, I mean, we have a bit of that. You know, you're much more outgoing than I am. So you give me a certain thing when it comes to social situations. Yeah. I'm probably, I'm not going to say what I'm good at, but I'm sure I bring something into your life.
I'm sure you
do. I'll sound big-headed if I give you the list. But you know, there is, and don't get me wrong, and I'm sure that to some extent we do use each other for that. You know, I much prefer being in social situations alongside you because it gives me a bit of an oomph to.
But it's also
be more natural with around other people.
But I guess the something that we have nowadays is we're taught that's the story of love, and Eric Fromm bangs on about this a bit. He's like, that's not love. Like, we're told that that's love. That's where it ends. Like, oh, I'm the confidence and to their timidness, but they're the organisational to my chaos. So together we make a team. It's like, well, that's just, like you say, it's using each other. That's relying on each other. And he has a really big problem with the idea of a team. He's like, you aren't teams. You're there to understand and respect and care for each other, but you're not there to be the deficit, each other's, where you fail, that they will just make up for that in you. It's not as simple as that. You should seek to be caring for that person, respect that person for everything they are, understand why they're that way, not just be the opposite to them, and be allowed to be the opposite and used, like you say, but
also developing them. So I mean, I suppose this is another thing which is, it taken to the extreme is a really damaging thing about relationships, is that if you're the outgoing one in your relationship and the other person's quite meek and mild and you're quite comfortable with that, then you become a bit threatened if the other person starts coming out of themselves a little bit.
Indeed.
But that's actually the antithesis of love, right? Yeah. I mean, what you should be trying to do is encourage the person to come out of themselves, to better themselves a bit. Yeah. Not with and not judge them if they don't. Yeah. But being a team is different from, I suppose, frankly, like educating each other. Again, going back to that first point, it sounds sort of big-headed, but it's important to say that it's not one person educating the other. It's both of you educating each other in different ways.
And with that, you're changing. So the idea of a soulmate, two people that are meant to be, cannot exist because you are not the same person you were yesterday, a year ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, we had that one day. Do you remember that one day when we were soulmates? And then the day after, it was like, fuck.
Shit, not my soulmate.
Should have made more of that.
But it's so true. It's just like, you can't have a one, you can't have a soulmate, you can't have this romantic idea of, you know, being in love at first sight or any of that, because we should aspire to be different every day. We should aspire to be growing. The whole idea of a higher power, which people think is inherent to humankind, is because we're always striving. If we're not striving towards something, then it doesn't make sense.
I don't think we are striving in 2025. Apart
As
from
a culture,
from striving towards our television screens and our phone screens. I mean, that's the thing. I think striving actually, in a lot of ways, has got quite a bad name.
It does nowadays.
Because striving suggests putting undue pressure on either yourself or on somebody else. If you have expectations of another person, if you say you could be better at this, then you are an evil person. And
also, it's those who do strive are, you know, businessmen. You know, another place that you hear striving is in the business world, with these egotistical mental people that are just gun-ho for their own success and privilege. Not privilege, but, you know, ego, and they want to be bigger and better and bigger and better. And it's like, well, there's other things to strive for, so it depends where your God is, I guess. But
in my hole.
The God is in my hole. But yeah, I just love the idea of, it proves that we have to, I think Alan de Botton's mentioned this before, not to use the term fall in love, but we fall in love over and over. That's the magic. It's not really magic, but the work there is to keep progressing, don't stagnate. We shouldn't be doing that in our own worlds. But we do, and we're encouraged to. We're encouraged to just come home, sit down, watch telly, you know, eat a pizza and do nothing. Capitalism will just take over forever if we do that. And actually, don't worry, because a robot will now deliver you that pizza, and sooner or later humans will just get to sit down and do absolutely nothing.
Well, it's fundamentally at the moment not even a robot that's delivering it, is it? It's basically someone who's being paid slave labour in order to bring your fucking shopping. So maybe just use your legs.
Isn't it better? Well. Isn't it so good that your life was made so easy? But with our lives being made easier, we need to figure out what the hell we're going to do to keep progressing ourselves, because if we don't understand and care for ourselves, we're never going to understand and care for other people, and love is just going to fall in the toilet.
And so we're gonna
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. We're gonna. I mean, to sort of obviously, there's going to be a limit to how much we're going to talk about this, but we've been doing some things for our relationship recently. Did you want to talk about any of those? Or not? Maybe in general terms. Maybe not not some of the more specific.
That's a separate. There's a separate account for that. No, I'm joking. I'm really.
Oh,
joking.
Dave's OnlyFans account. Yeah. Do you want to watch a 44-year-old fat man wank?
No, not at all.
Someone does, surely.
Oh my god! So we may have mentioned this before, but not really in any kind of explicit detail. But
and by the way, sorry, just very quickly before. Sorry, do continue. But we are not saying that we've got it right.
I was about to say this.
Hopefully that will become obvious.
This has just been a huge build-up to you've got to do work. So anyway, here's all the work we've done because we've smashed it.
We have not smashed anything.
Well,
you know,
when the couples therapy works well. God. But back in lockdown, we in our one-bed flat turned to each other on the sofa in our only room that isn't the bedroom.
Switched Netflix off for the first time in 3 weeks.
Yeah, and said, right, we aren't allowed to leave the house for 3 weeks. How do we tell each other I might just
3 weeks?
It was the first lockdown was 3 weeks.
Oh, I see, right.
How are we going to, and we're not allowed to leave the house, not together anyway, how are we going to tell each other I just want to be in the bedroom, I need some time away from you, but it's not mean. And that started some conversations where you have to be open and communicate. And
having spent most of our lives not being very, again, just to point out all of our foibles, because it is important.
Well, we're a good example of tons and tons of things in common, but thus a relationship does not make.
You're really shit at telling each other any of the most basic things.
Yeah, like really basic things. So with that kind of, oh gosh, we're going to have to very quickly get good at communicating because we are now stuck in a box together. We got a couples conversation book, which you'd been looking at for quite some time. I know that you'd mentioned it before, but lockdown ended up being the opportunity to knuckle down, not really have any excuse not to do it because we had all the time in the world. So we got this, it's called like Conversations for Couples or something, and it's meant to be 30-minute long conversations that are guided with 10 questions that you take it in turns to answer first. You ask each other and you take it in turns to be the one that answers first. I mean, on average, every conversation lasted between 1.5 to 2 hours, not this 30 minutes.
That's more than that. I mean, you've heard us go on this podcast. Yeah. Imagine what it's like when the microphones aren't on.
Honestly, 3 hours.
Well, I think we talked about the washing up for about an hour once.
That's true. That's true. You did.
On this podcast, we did, actually, in fairness. But I mean, yeah.
But it led to a lot of discussion about it all starts in childhood, doesn't it? So we talked about our attachment styles. We talked about what it means to be loved, like how we show love, and figuring out actually we show love in really different ways.
How we learn to show love and how we learn to receive love.
And then why we might communicate in a certain way, why we might deep down show one thing but inside be feeling another, our expectations of each other, our expectations of how we would want to be treated and communicate. And if they're opposite, of course there's going to be resentments, the way that we expect the other person to just know. I think that was a big thing that we found out. We had some really big differences in communication styles and attachment styles and how we wanted to be shown care and love, and then both of us really expected the other person to know that. And that's that romantic idea of love, which is, the other person will just know. Well,
it's worse than that, because it's a case when the other person doesn't know, because of course, why would they? How could they? How can they read your mind? You then become bitter about it's like, well, they can't love me because they don't even know this. And they haven't even worked out the fact that I'm pissed off about this thing that I've not told them about.
So I'm not gonna say anything. I'm just gonna be like, screw it. I'm not. And equally, I'm now gonna withhold my aversion of affection to them, and it becomes this weird, bitter one-upsman. When you don't even necessarily consciously know that that's what you're doing.
I don't think you consciously know that you're doing that at all. Sometimes you catch yourself. Yeah. I think for me, and I think I was probably worse at a lot of this than you were. When I caught myself doing it, then I'd stop doing it.
Yeah.
But it sometimes took 6 months.
Yeah.
I suddenly realised I'd been bitter about something for ages, just sitting there being bitter about it silently.
Yeah, and you could tell me that over and over again. But until I realised it for myself. And in fact, actually, if you told me it, I would probably do the opposite of believe it. I would vehemently deny it because you'd told me it. And then months later, you're like, I think I know what that person was trying to tell me. But I was too in my own head and in my own feelings about things.
Yeah, but it mixes up those two things, doesn't it? So what happens is one person's thought about it too much and it's grown into something way more than it is.
Yeah.
So when they tell the other person, they tell them in a very clumsy way, often within the context of an argument, often in quite an angry manner. That person, the opposite person, then thinks, what a prick.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not doing that. Then go fuck themselves. And then the same, then it goes in a circle again. But at some point they realise, oh shit, no, maybe I did do that. But then at that point, you've gone too far with it. You're not going to then backtrack and say, oh, I'm really sorry. I've been annoyed with you for the past couple of weeks because of something that I realised actually I did or whatever.
But also so much of that is based on, and this idea of understanding yourself before trying to be with someone else, is so much of that is based in, you know what, I inherently don't trust my own opinion, or I'm inherently I believe other people are better than me, or, you know, there's some deep down core belief that the way that comes out in is a very weird, jilted communication style. And I think what we found is we had deep down core beliefs that were almost the opposite of each other, which then created these clumsy communication styles that were the opposite of each other. And that, because we could only see it through our lens, when the respective person communicated in their way, we only understand it from our point of view, and it looks like, you know, being deliberately an arsehole, when actually only through working out ourselves and then just talking about it did we realise, oh no, you're not trying to be an arsehole, you're actually coming from a sincere place and just doing it completely wrong and opposite to my values and my beliefs about what care looks like. But we didn't know any of this until we set aside 30 minutes again, actually set aside 3 or 4 hours and had room to cry and do all sorts of you know, I think there was some angry shouts as well. There was loads.
Yeah,
It went in a full gamut of. Sometimes we got to the end.
It was quite ugly at times. We can be honest about that.
Yeah.
It wasn't an easy process.
But it was so worth doing that, you know, you kick yourself for not doing it earlier, but things happen when they happen for the very reasons that they do. And we were presented with time and space. And the thing is, we were forced that time and space, and now we carve it out because I think we realised it was so important to do. And then, you know, we did it and thought, it's all fixed. And a couple of years go by, and there's still little things creeping in and around, and little hidden resentments, and, you know, drinking to excess and having arguments. And you think, where's that come from? Something deep down about 3 weeks ago, probably. And we realised we needed to do more. And actually, you can't be big bollocks and finish that one communications book and be like, we're solved. It was a realization that a few years later we actually still had more stuff to do, and it's constant.
That goes back to that idea that like a relationship or love of any sort is you don't finish it, you just go until you're dead, and
go until you're dead.
But I think as well, just very quickly on the couples sort of therapy book, I would recommend anybody to do it. Yeah. Personally, I mean, you have to take my advice, but I really would recommend it. But I will say this about it as well, which I think is quite an interesting thing. Some of the conversations, or most of the conversations, at least start, and some of them are entirely, seem to be ridiculous things that just were not appropriate to us.
Yeah, like mundane.
So there was two pros to this, but you know, it was things like sometimes because it was very much written for the sort of normal, average person. Yeah. So it was things like, does he go to golf every Sunday morning and leave you with all the housework? Yeah. Or, you know, do you always do the washing up and the other person doesn't do the washing? Are you the one who always does the laundry? No, well, I think back then I wasn't. But the point is for us, we did genuinely, but also had quite a, you know, we never had those sorts of issues.
No.
There was never a kind of like, oh, fucking hell, you know, Siobhan's not done the washing up again or whatever. Yeah. We had a very... I think we were quite equal, probably. I don't know. We just never thought about it. It was never. We never had those sorts of.
We never really had to.
Annoyances, and obviously some of them were also like, "Do you always have to take the kids out on a Saturday morning?" And stuff. We're like, "Well, that's absolutely nothing to do with us." But there was two pros to that, and I think it's important to acknowledge them. One is that for us, what that does, I don't know if this is deliberate or not, but what I found it did was the first 4 or 5 questions, which were within the 10 of each week or whatever, each meeting,
each topic.
Would often be very basic, and what it did was it would make you go, do you know what, our relationship's not so bad. Do people really argue about who does the washing up? That's
and
bizarre.
Then you hit the next question, just like, when was the last time you were resentful to the other person? And you're like,
right.
Well, here we go.
All right, carve out a couple of hours.
Yeah.
But the point is that was quite a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
Because it what happens is it reframes your relationship. So I think when we weren't in that bad of a place, but when you go into doing something like that, you often think to yourself, you know, we've not got this right, you know. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people are doing it just, you know, when they're on the edge of breaking up and stuff. And it makes you appreciate a bunch of small things that you think, oh shit, do other people get annoyed about this sort of thing? I'm really lucky. So there's that. But the other thing about those tiny questions, and a lot of them were tiny and they weren't really deep, although we often talked for ages and made them much deeper than they were. If you can't tell. But is that thing, and we talk about this all the time, of just starting a new circular process. So you start talking about things in a slightly more positive way. The first step of that is just having a conversation, but then you start talking about the fact that, actually, do you know what, I probably do the laundry a bit more than you do, or something, and you acknowledge that, and that seems completely pointless and is not something that's ever caused you any stress or any annoyance or anything at all.
Yeah.
But it's like the first one in the tiny circle.
Yeah.
That then you make a slightly bigger circle as you talk about it, and then you make a slightly bigger circle, and then it becomes, I don't know what John Vervaeke calls it, but it's like feedback loop. And I think that one of the really good things, which lasted and has lasted to this day to some extent, is that we went from being two people that just the idea. I remember when I suggested doing the book, it felt so alien and weird and so like a mixture of kind of hippy dippy, kind of self-helpy,
Yeah,
all
and
these
it
things
was
that at that time we never did. We
and it was
never
the
touched
telltale
that
heart
stuff.
on the shelf for months,
Yeah.
because you bought it about 6 months before we actually even did it.
And then when we had the book, like you say, it sat there, and every time I thought to myself, I could, we've got an afternoon, maybe I should suggest doing the book, and then I think, oh God, she won't want to do the book.
No,
And
then what will it look like I've ever asked?
Yeah, would it look like I've suddenly got some big, like I hate her or something, and I'm trying to get to some point?
But then it changes, because then you bought me a School of Life relationship journal for my birthday that I guess 3 years before I'd have been like, you fucking what?
Yeah.
But then it was like, actually, this is a beautiful thing, because
but that's what I'm saying.
The intention is lovely,
and it's the first circle, tiny circle in a bigger circle. And to be honest, I think we've kind of, again, it hasn't been this clear, but we've sort of gone on a journey where the circle has just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And more recently, so we talked a little bit about changing our diet and all that sort of stuff. And when we changed our diet, basically all I did was I watched a couple of podcasts on YouTube and bought a book about gut health, right? And we won't go into it again. And I'm sure everyone's hearts sink as soon as I use the word gut health, and that's fine.
David's talking about gut health.
But I'm not going to go on about it. But the point that I'm making is that the process of doing it was just kind of like being interested in something and then kind of going on a bit of a YouTube hole about it, basically, and listening to some podcasts about it and reading a book about it. And so more recently, at this point, I think it's fair to say, because we did try and do that relationship book again at some point, and it was almost a little bit pointless because we'd kind of worked through that sort of stuff and there wasn't really anything, we didn't get as much out of it.
No.
And so my suggestion this year was to sort of go into improving our relationship in the same sort of way as we went into improving our diet, which was a bit more casual, not, like definitely carving out time, and we were carving out time. We have more open conversations generally. And
just watching, we've been watching a lot of, I say watching podcasts because we consume it mostly via YouTube, but watching a lot more podcasts by thinkers and just talking about not just gut health, but like now, we spend our time listening to two people talking about bigger thinking things.
Yeah.
Bigger thinking things doesn't sound like I've been listening to any. So it was about kind of trying to mash all that together within the frame of constantly improving.
But I do think that that's another way of doing it. I mean, I think if the idea of getting a book and sitting down and answering 10 questions with each other is too much, one of the other things we'd watch a podcast about relationship or some specific element of relationship, and then after almost by naturally, you then talk about the shit that you listen to in the podcast. Yeah,
or even if it's not immediate, because I guess sometimes there might be, especially if you've watched something quite heavy, you might then go, oh, what did you think? And you'd be like, oh yeah, think of something to say. But then it might be the next day, if you've been dwelling on it, you think, actually, there's a couple of tiny little things that person said that really resonated with me, and now I want to talk about it. And and then the cycle starts again, or the circles, like, let's have a small conversation about that. Oh, actually, this is something that I worry about. Actually, this is something I want to improve, and it begins the next thing.
But then as soon as something improves, then you're it's the same thing. It's like all of these things. You improve something very slightly, and then you want to improve it more naturally, and there's no effort. In fact, it's an effort not to do that. You really want to do that, and
it's more natural and habitual if you can just build upon things gradually and in a way that's actually meaningful and real. So in a natural way, whatever comes to mind, or whatever is the thing that speaks to you at that time.
So we'll call it a day soon, I think. But has there been any big takeaways that you've taken away from doing any of these things?
I think it is really interesting that in the 40s, 50s, whenever Eric Fromm wrote this book, he was saying then, love is, to quote Massive Attack, a verb. Love is a doing word. And he was saying then, this romantic idea of love is crippling and doesn't exist, and here's a very practical, well, not really practical, he actually says, you're going to hate this because it's not very practical, but here's all of the ways in which we understand love, and in order to love a person and be in love, you have to be able to love in all these ways. That's him in the 50s saying it. Buddhism has been saying for years, you've got in order to have compassion, you
millennia,
have to be...
not years.
Millennia. Compassion is not just to a god, it is to each other, it is to every being, and that includes yourself. In amongst that, you've got all the like monotheistic religions that have said the same thing but have tried to channel it via there's a god in the sky, he's vengeful, you got to do what he says, or there's a god in the sky and he's lovely and he wants you to be loving no matter what. But everyone's always been trying to say like in order to love each other, you have to love everyone, you have to love a higher being, you have to love, there's so many different ways to love, and it was always important to do all of those things. And in modern society, we have just lost sight of that. It's a practice. It's hard to do, but it's worth doing. And I know that, like, in our relationship, everything that's been worthwhile has come from us putting the efforts in. Strife. Just absolute strife.
No, I'm serious.
No, it's true. And it's like...
making yourself uncomfortable in order to make something better.
And it's just so important. Eric Fromm says, in the meaningless existence of the human condition, which is like almost cruel, all that we have is love, which is a bit pretentious to say, but I just like the idea of at the very basic, it's work, it's effort. No one is the same person. No one stays in the same love.
But that's what keeps a relationship interesting.
Exactly. And you have to be up for it and interested in doing it.
Yeah.
If we have this expectation that you don't have to do that, that's where resentment and sadness comes. But there's actually joy and loads to gain from bettering yourself, trying to get your other person to be better, being a part of them being better, not just being their, what they are deficient in, you just make up that. No, like, we're not team. We're individuals caring and being interested and respecting each other.
Well, I think that's one of the problems as well with this idea of that we view love as this Hollywood kiss, where two people immediately become betrothed, and then just spend the rest of their life happy together. Because, and I think this is probably very much a couples therapy sort of thing to say, but one of, I think, the problems with a lot of relationships is you get together with a person, and that relationship might last 6 months or it might last 40 years, who knows. But if you continuously try and stay in a relationship with the person that you met, so we met, whatever it was, 11 years ago or 12 years ago.
Yeah, I can't remember.
And
12 years ago, yeah.
And if I had... So in that time, you've gone from being someone in their early 20s to mid 30s. That's a huge difference. And I've gone from being someone in my
early 30s,
late 20s to
lies.
To
never met you in your 20s.
Late 30s. But we've changed tremendously through that time, and I mean, everybody does over the course of those periods of time. So if I had expectations of you being the person that I, in quotes, fell in love with, then that would be absurd. And neither of us would ever be able to be happy.
Exactly.
Because I would always be longing for Dillinger 4's first album, but I'd be getting Dillinger 4's fourth album.
Sorry.
And no, but Dillinger 4's fourth album is fantastic. It's not different. It's just it doesn't actually sound that different. That's a bad example because they kind of sound the same. But So there's something about growing in that sense, which you have to do anyway. Because if you don't do that, you're just gonna be fucking miserable.
Exactly.
And you're both gonna be miserable. You're gonna make yourself miserable. This is a bit stoic, I suppose, but if you have an expectation that someone is going to remain who they were when they were 25, and you end up with them until you die and you're in your 70s or something, then of course they're not going to be the same person. I mean, they're like you said earlier, they're literally not the same person. And this is where, so something you brought up much earlier, and just I thought of this then. You brought up sort of arranged marriages, or like how up until relatively recently, generally speaking, that's kind of how people got together. And I'm not for arranged marriages or anything, but there is an interesting statistic which I can't quote exactly, but it's more or less that there's an incredibly high percentage of arranged marriages which last, and then the divorce rate, obviously, for the rest of us has gone through the roof. And I think one of the reasons for that is, and I think this might be straight from Alan de Botton again, but I think one of the reasons for this is that by default, if you get an arranged marriage and you're literally marrying someone you don't know, then you start from the point where you haven't got a choice but to get to know each other, form a relationship which has a degree of all the things that we've been talking about now. And to have different expectations on that relationship, because you've not gone into it with this idea of this person is the one and only, they're my soulmate, this is us done, and then 6 months down the line you have a massive argument or you suddenly realise that you don't believe the same thing about anything. And all of a sudden you're like, fuck me, I thought this person was my soulmate, this is a nightmare. Well, actually, that's not a nightmare, that's great. It means that you're different people and that you can learn from each other and that there's all of these much more interesting things that you can explore together. You've got all of these differences. And I do think, and I'm not I have no moral opinion about the divorce rate being more. I'm a divorcee myself. I'm on my second marriage. That sounds weird to say, but it is true.
Never heard you say that.
No, it sounds weird, doesn't it? I don't think I've ever said those words, but I'm just saying, this is not a moral judgment whatsoever. But I do think that, obviously, I think at this point the majority of marriages end in divorce now. Only just, I think, but it's just gone over the sort of 50% line, I think. But if not, it's something similar to that. And I think that a lot of that is to do with this. And of course, sometimes you end up marrying the wrong person, and that's fine. Again, there's no moral judgment here about people getting divorced. But I do think that the majority of that is that in our individualistic society and in our modern society, we expect everything to be perfect all the time. And of course, no relationship is ever going to be perfect. So you just have to be willing to put up with a lot of stuff. Yeah. And the good thing about putting up with that stuff is that you can form an incredibly great, it's brilliant to be in a relationship with someone you love. You can love someone without them, A, being the person that you met 12 years ago, and B, being absolutely perfect in every way, because no one is perfect in every way. And important to say, you are not perfect. Whoever it is who's listening to this, and I say this, the royal you, I include myself in this, we're all a fucking nightmare,
all rubbish.
So if we expect someone to put up with us, we have to also put up with them.
Exactly. I like that.
So we'll leave it there, shall we?
Yeah.
This has been episode 80, The Big Love. It's Valentine's Day, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have any Manowar lyrics which are about love, because all of their lyrics are about swords and sorcery and killing and how you're a bozo.
Yeah, I haven't got any. So they did that Backstreet Boys one. Baby, baby, you're my NW.
That's Manowar of State.
Not
Manowar.
Manowar, sorry.
What a cock up. I'll tell you what, we're going to have a fucking Barney now.
You don't
right,
fucking
get out.
To me.
Out.
No, Manowar really don't sing about love. Oh.
Manowar do not sing about love.
Take off your...
Oh, remove your garments.
That's
right.
Close to
that's
love
what we're going to leave it on.
Yeah.
That's all about how he's going to make ladies into his slave. So I don't know if that's going to be popular with the kids.
No.
But it has got a brilliant bit where he does exclaim, remove your garments, which I think is beautiful. So we're going to leave you with that. As always, email us, shamcityroasters@gmail.com. Are you back on social media now?
Yeah, but not. I haven't been for the podcast. Should I?
Oh, I don't know. We may or may not be posting on Instagram, but we probably not. But whatever. This is coming out every 2 weeks. If you listen to it, that's great. If you don't, that's absolutely fine. No big. We love you all. Thank you very much, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time.
Ciao, ciao. Love you. Bye.
Bye.